to order. And if I may take it upon myself to ask all of you to keep Mac Tyson's family in your prayers. Mac was town attorney for several years, and his funeral is starting at 11 o'clock this morning, same time our meeting is starting. Public comments, the second item on the agenda. Anyone want to speak to any of these matters this morning? Seeing and hearing no request. Number 3 on the agenda, Mr. Hewitt.
Yes, sir. We've got Becky Veazey with the MAPS group here with us today. As you may recall, a personnel study was recommended or alluded to be recommended for the past couple years, and in the internal control review, there was a specific recommendation, and it was fortuitous that I encountered Becky at the fall managers conference. I believe maybe it was the spring one, and she was giving a presentation on personnel stuff. Needless to say, the room was full, and I was fortunate that we were able to dovetail our need with her availability. Subsequently, Becky and her group have performed a study for us, and she has some results, a draft program to share with the board and the public today.
Okay, thank you. And good morning, everyone.
You will speak in the microphone. Welcome.
Happy to. Thank you very much. Let me start by telling you a little bit about me and the MAPS group. Whenever I tell folks about myself, I start by saying I'm a Tar Heel, which means born in North Carolina, educated in Chapel Hill. I'm one of those true blue folks, so if you want to give me some grief after the meeting, I'm accustomed to it.
I just noticed that Duke blue.
Yeah, I am wearing Duke blue today. I actually grew up in Durham and in high school dated Duke professors' kids, so I went to a lot of Duke games before I went to Chapel Hill. I have both an undergraduate and a master's in public administration from Carolina. When I left there, I went to work with the city of Greensboro as an intern in their HR department. Then went back to Chapel Hill, worked for the town of Chapel Hill in their HR department for 3 years, and then went to Cary. And in telling my age, I was Cary's first ever HR director. I went there in 1981 when the town had a population of 26,000 folks, 175 employees. In the 7 years I was there, we went from 26 to 45,000 population, from 175 to 400 employees. Left Cary to be the HR director in Durham County, and then 30 years ago came to work with MAPS. So for the last 30 years I've been traveling the state, working with local governments all over North Carolina on a variety of things. You can see classification and pay studies and personnel policy is what we are doing with you. The first 2 things up there, that's probably 60 to 65% of our work. We also do retreat facilitation. We do a lot of management and supervisory training, including a fair amount for the School of Government. Team building, performance evaluation, hiring processes. Our newest service hasn't made it up there yet. It's employee engagement surveys that survey employees and feedback if things are satisfied with, the issues that organizations want to address to improve. In the 30 years I've been doing this, I've worked with over 200 local governments in North Carolina. Drive somewhere between 20 and 30,000 miles a year all over the state. Those are just some examples of some of the places that I've worked, as well as with some of the nonprofits. So what I'd like to do is talk with you a little bit about the process we've been through to conduct the study, the methodology of the study, pass the study out to you, walk you through what's there. As we go along, answer any questions you have at this point. Leave it with you, have you go through it, mark it up, dog-ear it, identify questions, and then come back and respond to those. So let me start by talking about why does the town need to have a classification and pay plan, and why does that plan need to be periodically updated? And you see 5 reasons there. When we talk about classification and pay, we're really talking about two sides of the same coin. Classification side of the coin, the pay side of the coin. The classification side of the coin is looking at what are the duties in a job. How do those duties compare to duties in other jobs? Are they very similar? Are they similar enough to have the same title? Are they different? And if they're different, then ranking jobs in terms of which require more education, more experience, more knowledge, more skill, more responsibility, which require less. What's an appropriate title for the job? In studies like this, sometimes we recommend a different title. Either sometimes because the duties have changed so much since the last study that the title is no longer accurate. And sometimes titles get old-fashioned, and we recommend something more modern. Then finally, on the classification side of the coin, capturing the essence of each job in something we call a class specification, what people typically refer to as a job description. Pay side of the coin then says, given a set of duties in a job, what's an appropriate salary range for that job from start to max? Excuse me, allergies are acting up this morning. Based on what other places in the market are paying for the same kind of work. And I know I will not be over. Get right here safely out of my hand gestures. So I want to start with that first of those 5 things. The first one, recruit, on the classification side of the coin, is looking at when there's a vacant position, that class specification or job description should be accurate and up to date. It should reflect the education, experience, knowledge, skills, abilities, certifications needed to do that job. So it becomes a really good tool for whomever's doing the hiring process. Helps them think about what needs to go in that job ad. What kind of criteria should we use to screen applications? What kind of interview questions should we ask? So we get a good match between the job that needs to be done, the person being hired to do that job. Studies show there can be as much as a 40% difference in productivity based on hiring decisions. So that class specification becomes a very helpful tool in that process. Recruit on the pay side of the coin is looking at when there's a vacant position, making sure the starting salary for the job is competitive enough that the town's not having to advertise and scrape the bottom of the barrel and take somebody less than satisfactory. Retain, of course, is the town's ability to keep the valuable, experienced, qualified people who are already here. And on the classification side there, because when I was in Chapel Hill, Cary, Durham County, one of my jobs was to do exit interviews, to talk to people who were leaving. So I know one of the reasons people do leave is because they don't feel like they're getting credit for the level of responsibility or the level of difficulty in their job. And then retain on the pay side of the coin is looking not just at that starting salary, but the whole salary range. Is it competitive? Is it being used in a competitive fashion? Internal equity, again, is looking within the organization, making sure jobs are ranked appropriately, but also looking across departments. Because you would not want, for example, a situation where you have an administrative assistant in Department A, an administrative assistant in Department B. The administrative assistant in Department A has more difficult responsibilities. The one in Department B is in a higher pay range. So creating that internal equity horizontally and vertically within the organization, which hopefully then leads to equal pay for equal work, which is the fundamental underlying principle that we are using in what we are recommending to you, trying to create equal pay for equal work. Maximize cost effectiveness. I think the best way to describe that one is to tell you about a study we did 29 years ago. This was one of the early studies I did as a consultant, and it was in one of those cities, one of the faster growing cities near Charlotte. At the time, it was the largest city in the state that had never had a pay plan. They had a long-term city manager. He'd been there over 30 years. And his approach was he did not want salary ranges. He didn't want anybody to tell him what he could or couldn't pay. He wanted to decide. So he would bring folks in, interview, hire them, and set their salary, and then they'd periodically get raises. When we did that study, again 29 years ago, we found, that manager retired, new manager came in and asked us to set up a pay plan for them. We found a custodian that was making $45,000 a year. Now, $45,000 a year 29 years ago is more like $75,000 a year now. We found an administrative assistant making $52,000, more like $82,000 now. And then we found a bunch of underpaid folks. So what was happening in that city is they were using their resources to overpay some folks, underpay a bunch of folks. So the whole idea behind having a classification pay plan up to date and accurate is having a structure that allows elected officials and management make good decisions about where to put resources so the organization can hire, keep good people, and be fair. And then the final piece you see there, defensible system, two parts to that. One is defensible in the legal sense, and there are a number of laws we pay attention to as we do this. Americans with Disabilities Act, OSHA's Bloodborne Pathogen Standards, Fair Labor Standards Act, just to name a few. The other part of defensible is that what we are recommending to you is based on professional methodology. And we don't listen to anybody whispering in our ear saying, give so-and-so a raise, don't give so-and-so a raise. We are making professional recommendations. So let me pause there. Questions on anything so far?
I do. I haven't heard the word compensation, and you use the word pay. That confuses me, that you would not talk compensation, just pay.
So compensation can, to some people, mean just pay. To some people, it means pay and benefits. So I talk about them separately just to be really clear. So right now, I am just talking about pay. I will also talk with you about benefits a little bit later on. But because different people define the word compensation differently, I just try to be as clear as I can. Any other questions at this point?
One that pops up in my head is that what's the frequency of a review of pay analysis?
Typically, and I think it's on the next slide.
I'm sorry.
Yes.
Oh, wait.
Right there. So typically, organizations do studies like this about every 3 to 5 years.
Okay, thank you.
On the 3-year end, when there's a lot of growth and change going on. When I was in Cary, because we were growing so quickly, we studied a third of our jobs every year and then started back over. We have a number of clients like Clayton, Apex, Garner, that are growing rapidly who are on that 3-year cycle. When the organization's fairly stable, the rule of thumb's about once every 5 years. There are 2 things that are going on that create the need for those studies. One is that over the course of time, jobs change. And what I mean by that is the duties and jobs will change. Won't change in every job, but it will in some. And it can be for any number of reasons. It can be because of reorganizations that shift around who does what, who reports to whom. It can be because of new technology people use that change the kind of skills they have to have. It can be because of regulations changing that change kind of certifications people have to have. It can be because the organization adds or deletes services that adds or deletes responsibilities and jobs. So for any number of reasons, what somebody used to do in a job, what's being done in that job now can be different enough that the job's no longer properly classified, and that's the first place we start. The second part, the market, the going rate of pay, everybody knows pay changes over time, usually goes up, and most organizations typically do what we call a cost of living adjustment, which usually means kind of following the average of inflation and moving pay up kind of following that average over time. And that's a good thing, but there's a flaw in that. The flaw is that while you're following the average of inflation, in reality, some jobs are going up faster than that inflation rate in the market. Some are going up slower than that inflation rate. One good example is nurses. When I was in Durham County in the late 80s, we could not hire enough nurses. We couldn't keep our public health nurses. We had to bump nursing pay 10% 2 years in a row just to get and keep nurses. That was the late 80s. In the early 90s, the North Carolina General Assembly mandated all the nursing schools in the state to increase their enrollment. By the middle 90s, nursing pay kind of flattened out for a while. Now, once again, we're hearing there aren't enough nurses. Once again, nursing pay is going up faster than the average of inflation. Law enforcement is another example. I've been in the public sector over 40 years working with local government, HR. The first 15 to 20 years, law enforcement pretty much just kind of followed the average of inflation. In the 80s, the Clinton administration did a lot of what they call COPS grants, They gave grants to local and state governments to hire more law enforcement. About that time, we started seeing law enforcement salaries start going up a little bit more. Around the year 1990, the city of Charlotte had 100 police vacancies they couldn't fill. Raleigh had 50 they couldn't fill. About that time, we really started seeing law enforcement salaries going up. And that has kind of continued. They have typically been going up at higher than the average of inflation since then. So different jobs are fluctuating at different rates in the market. What we do in a study is we go to the market at a given point in time, identify the going rate of pay for jobs, assign them to a pay plan that we recommend to you, then typically you go another 3 to 5 years, adjust kind of on the average of inflation, come back, do another study, make the fine-tuning adjustments again. Is that making sense? Questions about that? So the process that we have followed, obviously the town identified the need for the study. We started out with an employee orientation where we took them through the same information, tried to set realistic expectations. I know from having been inside organizations when these studies are done, as soon as people hear study, they immediately think, I'm going to get a pay raise. So we try to help employees understand, we recommend where adjustments are needed. Not every job needs to be adjusted. Also, try to make everything as transparent as possible. Make sure everybody understands the process, has a chance to answer, get any questions answered. No secrets about the process. Every employee completes a questionnaire that then goes through the chain of command for review and sign off that has their job duties. We review those and then we do interviews. And we interviewed at least one employee with every different set of job duties, which means we interviewed almost everybody here. The purpose of the interview, again, is to make sure we understand job duties clearly, sitting there with their questionnaire going through it, so we can accurately classify the job and then make accurate salary comparisons. Then we went back to the office, did our analysis, gathered salary data, put everything into a draft report, sent it back for management review, got some feedback, made very few tweaks, just very few, and today are presenting it to you. So that was the process. Questions about me? Okay. So just to talk just a little bit about methodology, some of the terms I'm using, the difference between a position and a classification. And I'll just use the police department as an example. There might be 6 positions in the classification of police officer. There's only 1 position in the classification of police chief. So you can have multi-position classifications, you can have single-position classifications. The only time we put multiple positions in the same classification is when all of the jobs are similar enough that any one applicant with a given set of knowledge, skills, and abilities could do any of the jobs. If a job requires a substantially different knowledge or skill or ability, it goes in a different classification. The class specification, as I said earlier, is similar to a job description. The difference is a job description describes a single position. So essentially the questionnaires the employees completed is their job description. We take that then and turn it into the class spec, which is a little bit broader, a little bit more formalized, and covers all the positions in the classification. One of the ways of thinking about the class specification is if the town were going to purchase a backhoe, somebody would put together a list of specifications for that backhoe. You know, how deep does it need to be able to dig? How big a bucket do you need? Do you need an enclosed cab? Do you need a front-end loader on it? Do you need rubber tire track? All those things would go into the specs, and you would take bids, compare those bids to what your needs are and what's the best value. The class specification is what the town needs in a job. Has on it the duties and responsibilities to be performed, and therefore the knowledge, skills, abilities, education, experience, and certifications needed. When that position is vacant, you take applications and compare those applications back to that class spec to see who best meets the needs of the town. The most important distinction on those 4 words is the difference between position and employee. The classification plan is a position classification plan, not an employee classification plan.
What that means is we study jobs, not people. The classification plan should be accurate as people come and go in the town, because it represents the work that the town has that needs to be done, not the person who happened to be doing that work at the time of the study. We can classify a vacant position, and often do. Somebody's looking at a new position in the budget, or somebody position's vacant. As long as the supervisor gives us the duties and responsibilities, we can classify the job. Questions on that one? So I want to go over some of the things that are most frequently misunderstood about classification. These are some of the factors that I find most confusing. And these are not factors that go into determining which jobs are at the same classification level, which are at different classification levels. Now, this is on the classification side of the coin. When we get to the pay side of the coin, I'll talk about that as well. Let me start with volume of work and just give you a hypothetical example. Let's say hypothetically the town had 3 water meter readers. I know you've got AMR now, so this is an outdated example. We'll just say hypothetically. We're doing it the old-fashioned way. And we'll say hypothetically one of those meter readers averaged reading 500 meters a day, one averages 600 meters a day, and one averages 700 meters a day. Different volumes of work. So when we look at those 3 positions to determine do they go in the same classification level or different classification levels, what we're looking at is, are the duties the same or are the duties different? Now, if all 3 of those meter readers have the duty of reading residential water meters, then the duty's the same, the classification's the same, the salary range is the same. Now, the difference between 500 meters a day and 700 meters a day might be the person reading 700 meters a day is doing a better job, more productive. That would be performance evaluation and performance or merit pay, a different part of the compensation system. Difference might be the one reading 500 meters a day is just reading in a part of the town where houses are spaced out further, just takes longer. It's not a classification factor. On the other hand, if one of the meter readers is reading residential water meters, the second one is reading, repairing, replacing, testing meters. The third one is reading, repairing, replacing, test meters, and operates the backhoe when there's a water line break. Then you've got 3 different sets of duties and 3 different classifications. Is that making sense for everybody? Length of service is the person. Classification is looking at the job, not the person. So if you've got, again, 3 police officers, one's been here 6 months, one's been here 5 years, one's been here 15 years. Again, if the duties are the same, the classification is the same, the salary range is the same. Now, hopefully when you get to the pay side of the coin, you would see them at 3 different places within that pay range. Employee qualifications, this one gets interesting. Because again, in classification, what we're looking at is not what are the qualifications the person has, but rather what are the qualifications the job requires. Probably the best example of this goes back to when I was working for the town of Chapel Hill. We were doing a study of our bus drivers, had about 50 bus drivers at the time, and believe it or not, 2 of them were attorneys. They finished law school at Carolina, they passed the bar, hadn't found a job as a lawyer yet, so they were still driving buses, which was how they put themselves through law school. So who thinks you should pay a bus driver with a law degree differently than the other bus drivers? Y'all get the point. As you can imagine, those attorneys that were bus drivers argued with me a lot about it. And then finally, employee work performance is not part of this. Again, that's the person. We're looking at the job, not the person. We had no clue who was doing a great job, who might be in trouble as we did this study. It had nothing to do with what we were doing. I did a study sometime back with a really small town. This was a town that only had 7 employees, no manager. They had like a public works commissioner and a police commissioner that employees reported to. And I passed out the results to the board, which I'm doing shortly with you. And we were going through it, and we got to one particular page, and one of the board members just blurted out, "We can't pay this person this much." And I said, "What's the problem?" He said, "Well, he's doing a lousy job. We're getting ready to fire him." And this was a public meeting. And I said, "Well, you know, if you've told him what he needs to do to improve, and you've given him a chance to improve, and you've been through your disciplinary processes, and he's not doing the job, you do have to deal with that person appropriately. But you still want to classify the job accurately, put it in a competitive salary range, so if you fire somebody who's not doing a good job, you'll have a competitive enough salary, you can hire somebody who can do a good job. In the case of that small town, their salaries were so low, they couldn't find a competent person. So it really is two completely separate issues. Questions on any of those? So these are the factors that we do use in determining which jobs are at the same classification level, which are at different classification levels. That first one is mental difficulty. How hard are the problems that have to be solved? Complexity. How many steps does somebody have to go through to complete a task and get it done in 3 steps? So take them 33 steps to get through something. Variety of work. How many different kinds of things does somebody have to know about or be able to do? Is it just read meters? Is it read meters and operate construction equipment? Is it read meters, operate construction equipment, and make mechanical repairs? How many different kinds of things? Public contact, who does this person come in contact with to get the job done? Is this somebody who's just dealing with coworkers, or does this person represent the town to the public? And if they're dealing with the public, what are they doing? Are they just taking in information? Are they giving out information on behalf of the town? Are they solving problems or complaints? Are they enforcing laws or codes? Are they negotiating contracts on behalf of the town? Education and experience, and again, that's what does a job require, not what does the person have. Work environment and hazards, is this a job where somebody has to go out at 2 o'clock in the morning when it's 10 degrees outside or 110 degrees outside in the middle of the day, and deal with dangerous people, dangerous situations. Physical effort, we look at the frequency, intensity, and duration of physical effort required. Supervision given, does the job have supervisory responsibility, and if so, at what level of authority? And then supervision received. Is this a job where the employee and supervisor work right together? The supervisor makes all the decisions, catches and corrects the employee's mistakes, or does the employee work independently, make his or her own decisions, catch and correct his or her own mistakes? Questions on any of those? So I want to turn back to the pay side of the coin and just talk a little bit about how this study fits into the overall context of the compensation system. So there are 4 components that are typically in all compensation systems in some form or fashion. Each has a separate purpose. Sometimes they're combined in different ways in different organizations, but 4 underlying primary principles you're trying to achieve in pay and compensation. And it's public sector, private sector, pretty much the same. The biggest difference is in the public sector, it's public information. So we have to be able to justify to 2 coworkers why one's paid differently, to a citizen, to a taxpayer, to anybody who asks. There has to be a clear compensation policy approach and the ability to justify. So I'm going to walk you through those 4. And the first one is the primary focus of the job, updating the classification plan, updating the pay plan. And you almost, I think you can almost say accurately that the pay and classification plan is the infrastructure of the HR system. When it's out of whack, it pulls everything else a little bit out of whack. It's just really hard to have an effective HR system if your classifications are incorrect or your pay is not competitive or not accomplishing what it needs to accomplish. The second of the 4 is typically called a cost of living adjustment. Compensation professionals call it a market adjustment because what you're doing is you're moving your pay plan with changing market conditions, moving that hiring rate, moving that max. Typically looking at the national rate of inflation or CPI, but also the local economy, because the local economy can be stronger or weaker than the national economy. And what this is intended to do is to make sure your pay ranges are staying competitive in between studies. If the town does not do this, and your competitors do, then what would happen is their hiring rates would be going up, yours would be staying the same. It would get to the point you could only hire people nobody else wanted, which obviously is not where you want to be. And especially in between studies, part of what this is intended to do is keep down the cost of turnover. Turnover is very expensive. When an employee leaves, the cost to the town, according to the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, is anywhere from 2/3 of that employee's annual salary to 125% of that employee's salary. And you've got a large percentage of your workforce in that 100 to 125%, because law enforcement, certified utility folks, certified building inspectors are all part of that high cost turnover area. Questions on that one? The third of the 4 parts of the compensation system is that once you have pay ranges established, there needs to be some method of moving employees across that range. Now, there is no one right or wrong way to do that. It really does depend on the organization's philosophy. I know one county, for example, that says this year we'll move half the employees 2.5% in the range. Next year we move the other half 2.5%. They just take turns. The majority of local governments base that movement on performance. They say we've got 2 employees, one is doing a better job. We want the one doing the better job to be getting larger increases, making more money. And the trend has been to shift resources out of automatic kinds of increases more into pay for performance, to have employees involved in establishing job-related performance standards and goals that serve as the basis for performance evaluation. Excuse me. To have supervisors trained to conduct effective performance evaluation conferences is one of the big keys, so that both the employee and supervisor leave that conference saying this was time well spent. We talked about important things. And then having the focus being not on judging performance, but improving. How can we continuously improve and get better as individuals, as an organization? Questions on that one? And the final one is longevity pay. Longevity says, thank you for sticking with us. We appreciate your loyalty. Typically in North Carolina, it's awarded in lump sum amounts, typically sometime between Thanksgiving and early December, so it kind of doubles as a Christmas bonus. Of the 4 parts of the compensation system, longevity is considered the 4th priority in terms of its overall impact to the organization. One of the values of longevity is that when it's coupled with performance pay, it makes it really clear the difference between performance and seniority. For example, it's possible, probably not likely, but it's possible to have a 2-year employee doing a better job than a 10-year employee. If that were the case, the 2-year employee would get the larger performance increase, the 10-year employee gets the larger longevity increase. 2 different kinds of pay for 2 different purposes. Questions about that one? Okay, so what I'd like to do is just illustrate just a little bit with you how the pay plan is intended to work. Move this over so you can hear me on this. Not trip. I've gotten a lot of dyslexia as I've gotten older. Thank you. Okay, can everybody see it? You think that's picking me up? Okay. So the way the pay plan is intended to work is you have pay grades that go down the page like this. And then you have a range, and what we've recommended to you is a hiring rate, a minimum, a midpoint, and a maximum. And the way this is intended to work is that the grades going down the page are intended to represent the job. So I'm just going to use a police department as an example. I think their rank structure makes it easy to follow. So we'll say hypothetically, grade 11 to police officer, grade 14 to sergeant, grade 17 to lieutenant. And I'm just going to stick some round numbers up here just for illustration. Don't read anything into these. So we'll just say hypothetically this goes from 35 to 50,000. We'll say this goes from 40 to 60,000. So when we say the grade represents the job, what that means is if grade 11 is a grade for police officer, all police officers are in that grade. Grade 14 is a grade for sergeant, all sergeants are somewhere in that grade. If I'm a police officer and I get to the top of my grade, I can't just go down to the next grade. That represents the maximum value in the market for that job. It's what keeps you from overpaying, having that $52,000 administrative assistant 29 years ago. So the only way my grade changes is if my job changes. So if I'm a police officer and I get promoted to sergeant, I go to grade for sergeant. If I'm a sergeant and mess up and get demoted to police officer, I go back to grade for police officer. A study like this could say, well, really, police officers should be in grade 12. If you approve that, then all police officers would move to grade 12. The grade and the job stay together. The range then going this way is where the person comes in. So you've got job this way, person this way. So let's say hypothetically, the chief is hiring 2 new police officers today. And let's say hypothetically one of them is coming straight out of basic law enforcement training, has no previous experience. The other one, let's say, has been a police officer in Ocean Isle for 2 years. Now they're both going to be police officers, so they're both going to grade 11, but you've got a difference in the qualifications of the 2 people. So the way this is intended to work is that you would start the one with no previous experience here, the one with previous experience somewhere above that. Then, going back to those 4 things, whoops, went the wrong way. Oh well. If you go back and think about the, thank you. Yeah, so I'm going back 2 more. That one, yes, thank you. So if you go back to that 3rd one, range movement, once they're on board, there needs to be some method of moving them across that range. If that method is performance, then what that means is that periodically each employee is considered as to whether or how much of an increase he or she has earned. Now, there is a seniority component to performance or merit pay, because the longer somebody's here, the more opportunities they have to earn an increase and move across the range. The performance component is the better job somebody does, the larger and more frequent the increases, and the faster they move across the range. So that the kind of distribution you hope to see in an organization who has a performance pay philosophy is you hope to see long-term, high-performance employees. Been here a long time doing a really good job in the top parts of their pay range. You hope to see middle-term high performers and long-term middle performers in the middle parts of their pay range. And you hope to see brand new folks and some longer-term folks who are doing enough to keep their job, but not a whole lot more, in the beginning parts of their pay ranges. Let me pause. Questions? Am I making sense? No questions so far? So if you look at that second one, the annual market adjustment or cost of living, when you do that, then the whole pay table should change. And part of what we're giving the town is an easy linked spreadsheet that allow you to do that. So let's say hypothetically you did a 2% cost of living adjustment or market adjustment. This would change by 2%. This would change by 2%. This would change. Everything on the table changes by whatever that amount is, so that your hiring salaries are continuing to move and stay competitive in the market over time. So what y'all have asked us to do primarily is this part right here. What is the appropriate classification for each job and what pay range is competitive for that job? Once we do that and we create this table, we've got to get every employee onto this table in the proper classification, in the proper salary grade that goes with that classification. And we've done 3 different implementation strategies for you to look at. The important thing about implementation strategies is that you have to treat everybody consistently. You can't pick and choose and say, well, we're going to do something for one person and something different for somebody else. The implementation to be legally sound needs to be a consistent way. And for each of those 3 implementation strategies, we've calculated a cost. We've also done something we call a distribution analysis. And what that means is we've taken all the employees and all the jobs and all the grades, and we've collapsed them together and done bar charts. How many employees are at the very beginning of their pay range? Bar. How many are 5% into their range? Bar. How many are 10% into their range? Bar, and so on. And if you draw a line across the top of those bars, what you hope to see in a long-term stable organization is you hope to see something that looks sort of like a bell-shaped curve. That's the ideal. You want to have approximately 2/3 of the employees in the middle, 1/3 of the pay. Unfortunately, sometimes when we do this, instead of that bell-shaped curve, we see something that looks more like a ski slope, more like that. And that's called compression. And if an organization has compression, there are two associated problems with that. One is a hiring problem. And what I mean by that is, let's say you've got a really well-qualified candidate you want to hire. To get them, you've got to pay right here, but your on-board equally or better qualified folks are back here. You got a problem. And especially in the public sector, because it's public information. The second problem with compression can be a morale issue. Because instead of having long-term high performers over here and brand new folks here, they're very close together. And unfortunately, that can lead to that extensive turnover that I was talking about earlier. In our business, to a large extent, law enforcement is the canary in the mine shaft for us. Because what happens, and I haven't asked the chief if it happens here, but typically you'll have officers going to court to testify. And they have to wait to see if they're going to be called or if it's a plea deal or whatever. And they're sitting there and they start talking with the officers from all the other jurisdictions in the county. And the conversation often goes something like, well, how do you like where you are? Well, you know, what did they hire you at? And not always, but often the hiring rates are the same. You know, and then, well, what are you making now? And you'll have one, you know, who's gotten here, and one who's gotten here, and one who's gotten here, and one who's gotten here. And they all say, oh, we want to go work here. And so, essentially, I think the point of this is that competition has two dimensions. One is hiring, being competitive at the hiring rate, so that you're not losing the best candidates or having to hire people nobody else wants. But the other is making sure what people are actually making is also competitive, that you don't have that compression issue. Have I said that clearly? What questions do you have? Okay, let me pass the studies out. So what I'll do is just kind of walk you through what's here as I go along. Please speak up with any questions you have. So in the front pocket, because your manager is not a classified position, we didn't put it on the pay plan, but we wanted to do a thorough job, so we wanted to give you a salary range for that role. Just in case you ever it's needed or if it's useful. So there's a letter there that gives you that information. Then going from there, there's a cover letter, a title page, a table of contents, And then the third or fourth page in from the beginning, before you get to that first tab, is an organization chart. It's right after the table of contents. Before that first big tab. And that organization chart represents, as we understand it, reporting relationships. It also reflects the titles that we've recommended to you. So you can see just a quick look at the organization that way. The last page before that first blue tab is on methodology. And we've already pretty much talked about that. So if you go past that first blue tab, pages, the next several pages, all the way through until you get to page 10, is a department by department and then classification by classification narrative. There's basically a paragraph on each classification there that talks a little bit, a thumbnail sketch of duties, starts with the current title, ends with the recommended title. In some cases they're the same, in some cases they're different. If we saw your job as stronger or weaker than the market comparisons we got in terms of responsibility levels, we made some comments about that. So just a thumbnail of our thought process, basically. If you go on over to page 10, please tell me if I'm going too fast or if you have questions. At the top of page 10 are the organizations that we surveyed. For the most part, it's either New Hanover or Brunswick County trying to reflect the places that your places that hire people to do the same thing you hire people to do, and where your employees could leave and go to work with them without having to move. And we might have gone a little bit further just to get enough comparisons, but I tried for the most part to reflect that. And then we talk about compression there, those percentages. So you see bald head 50% and so on. What that's reflecting is the difference between the hiring rate and the max. So if you have a range that goes from 40 to 60, 60 minus 40 is 20, 20 is half of 40, that's a 50% range. So what that told us, we focus on placing jobs on the pay plan based on the hiring rate. That average of 50, no, I didn't put the average on this page, but it averaged around 51, 52. We recommended 50% for you, just to get close so that your maximums are, pretty close to the average of that. Questions about that? So starting at the bottom of this page and on to the second page is where you'll see the 3 implementation strategies that we calculated. So let me walk you through those. The first one takes each employee and places them, at least at hiring, in the recommended range. And if they pass probation, the difference between hiring and minimum is you move an employee to minimum once they pass probation. So if they pass probation, we place them at probation plus 1%. Different color here. Show a little bit more. So it's minimum plus 1% per year of service. And in option 1, that is year of service with the town. So from their hire date. In the classification at minimum plus 1%. Now that implementation strategy is very conservative because with a 50% range, minimum is 5% above hiring. Somebody would have had to have been here 45 years to be placed at the maximum of the range. So you can see that that's very conservative. Options 2 and only pause. Questions about option 1? So options 2 and 3, instead of basing it on hiring rate, we based it on length of service in the current job. So for example, if you had a police officer who had been promoted to sergeant, we based it on when they became a sergeant. So time in the current job. And in option 2, that's in the current job, and 1%, minimum plus 1% per year of service. So that's even more conservative than option 1. Option 3, again, is based on how long they've been in the current job, and instead of minimum plus 1%, it's minimum plus 0.75% per year of service. We can calculate the other options, but that first one is a fairly standard beginning point for a lot of organizations when they're implementing a pay plan. So questions about those?
These costs to implement, is that specific to us?
Yes, yes. And at the notes at the bottom there, first of all, it is salaries only. That does not include benefits costs. Rule of thumb is benefits is going to be another roughly 18% of that. FICA, 401k, retirement, those kinds of things, roughly 18% more. The other thing is that's a full 12 months of cost. So if, let's say you said we're going to implement this October 1st, then your cost for this fiscal year would be 75% of that amount for this fiscal year. Other questions at this point? The third one, we did recommend if there are employees, first of all, who have documented disciplinary action that essentially says they're not quite earning their paycheck right now, that if that job is slated to have to be below market, that you would hold that employee's increase until they get their job performance up to par. That the manager have the authority to do that. And also, if for any reason the implementation strategy created any internal inequities, that the manager has some flexibility to make a little bit of a tweak there if need be. Number 4, these cost calculations are based on, I think, a payroll last week. Again, every time you have turnover or hire somebody new, I think there was one vacancy, this will change a little bit. I mean, it's a snapshot in time, but it's pretty close to your actual cost. And then I already mentioned that the town manager is not included in this. Page 12 shows those bar charts that I was talking about. So you can see that option 1, which is where you spend a little bit more money, has closer to that bell-shaped curve that you want. Each of the next 2 options, get a little bit more compression. Questions about that? So page 13 is the actual pay table that Ms. Scratch will be up here on the flip chart. Is intended to represent it's the hiring minimum, midpoint, and max. And then the next page over has the pay, the job titles assigned. And essentially, page 14 is your classification document. That's what you would actually adopt. The E's there in the middle, down toward the bottom, reflect the jobs that are exempt from the wage and hour provisions of the Fair Labor Standards Act, which means you do not have to make them subject to overtime. You may choose to make them subject to overtime, but jobs that do not qualify, you can't not make them subject to overtime. Any questions on page 14? So starting on page 15 until you get to the next tab, this information, you'll see the very same salary data that we looked at in making the recommendations that we compiled. Couple of notes on that. One is the data you will see from Bald Head. Bald Head has made a organizational philosophy decision to lead the market by about 5%, or to be at 60% of the market, is another way of saying it. What we typically recommend, unless we're told otherwise, is salaries that meet the market, that don't lead and don't lag behind what we would see as meeting the market. The other thing is that you'll see averages on those pages for entry-level jobs where the matches are pretty good. We pretty much look at those averages, taking into account bald head, may skew it a little bit. For supervisory jobs, or for some jobs where we don't have good matches, we really use our expertise more. And look at the size of your organization, the scope of what's being supervised and managed, the variety of what's being supervised and managed. All of those things come into play in our recommendation. Ready to go to the next tab? So behind that next tab, it says policy. And behind that, first of all, is just at the top, we are giving you a new personnel policy. The current policy is really old. There would have been so many amendments. It would have been a nightmare. So we felt it was better to just start from scratch. The approach we've taken to the policy is to try to reflect as much as possible language we know has stood the test of time in other local governments. That, there have been grievances, there have been court cases. It's kind of been tested. Secondly, we try to strike a balance between policy that gives guidance but is not onerous. We don't want supervisors having to go check a policy manual before they make a decision. And then we've also tried to reflect just policy. Sometimes there are administrative procedures, and y'all don't need to get bogged down in administrative procedures. We leave that for the manager. What we've given for you to adopt are the policy issues, and then the manager in implementing those may need to put in place a procedure to do that. So that's that first part at the top. Then, starting about a third of the way down and continuing, are some general management recommendations. Some of these are things you may want to go ahead and do, or we're recommending that you do as part of personnel policy, for example. Some of them you may consider a 5-year plan, things that you want to think about in 2 to 4 years, or delay. And that takes you, pages 5 and 6 was an example of a police career development plan. I think probably the number of places who do it is growing. The last time I looked, probably a little bit more than half of the law enforcement jurisdictions in Brunswick County are doing this. Pages 7 and 8 are benefits comparisons. And so some, like large corporations, have what they call a total compensation philosophy, where they consider benefits and pay together. Because local government benefits, to a large extent, are very similar. And you'll see on here, there's some minor differences, but to a large extent, they're very similar. So that's why when we're doing a study like this, we look at benefits, but more specifically, we're looking at pay ranges. But you'll see we did, for example, recommend going to 12 holidays instead of just in some years 11 and some years 12, depending on when Christmas falls. I think that's about. We did also recommend for employees who are also in the retirement system. Now, a lot of I think right now, all of your folks who work less than full-time are considered what we would call limited service. They're less than the 1,000 hours a year that is required, that requires you to put someone in the retirement system. But should you ever choose to say, we want this position, but we think it only needs to be 30 hours a week, then that person would be in the retirement system. And we've also recommended that vacation, holiday, and sick leave be prorated as well. Again, right now it doesn't apply because you don't have anybody in that category.
On page 7, I mean, it just glares out at us, at me, that the compensation for percentage of family is much higher than anybody else.
You are the highest. I think, let's see, Bald Head is second.
And they've made a conscious decision to overpay
Well, that was just on the pay side. That was not the,
Pay,
yeah, it was not a fair decision.
so what's behind your recommendation?
To not change that, I mean, I don't see a reason to. What we have on the next page, the thing that you're not doing, that everybody else, almost everybody else is longevity pay. That's at the bottom half of the page. We gave you a schedule to do probably, I'm guessing 18 years ago. We did a study for Oak, I've done probably 7 or 8 studies for Oak Island. But one of those studies, they were doing 100% for family coverage. And at that time, we recommended that they not, even though a lot of other places were doing longevity, that they not do longevity because they were leading the market on that so much. But at that time, most other places were 50% and below. So that's one way that you might choose. You know, do you want to do longevity and reduce the family contribution? And an argument could be that longevity applies to everybody, family insurance does not. Or we want to, this is something that is what we're known for. It's something we've had a long tradition of doing. We want to keep the family coverage and not add longevity. Or this is the way we want to be a little bit above market and we're going to do both.
And
That is a policy decision.
And this number is per year?
That's a lump sum that does not build into
It's
base.
a bonus.
So those are, you know, that's some policy sort of decisions, I think, for you. What do you want to be known for? What is your organizational philosophy? The other, just to take a minute on that as well, is when you think about your compensation philosophy, when you look at those 4 things, you know, what do you value? And where you put dollars sends a message on what you value. You know, do you value performance more or longevity more? You know, what message do you want to send to employees in terms of what you fund?
Did you put a dollar amount against the benefits?
I did not. I thought this is probably something you would not be doing until next July, and that would probably be a time to think. On the pay side, we did because we recognized you may want to do that before July.
You had mentioned performance and longevity. I kind of see all that coming together equally. That maybe I have a high expectation on the performance side. And if I get that, then automatically I may get the longevity unless I can't compete with what's out there.
Well,
If that makes sense.
Part of when we talk about longevity, what we're talking about is a way of recognizing. You know, the places, all these places, when they do longevity pay, you know, they may do this at like a Christmas luncheon for employees and pass out those checks and you know, recognize this employee has been with us in 20 years. This employee's been with us 15 years, and recognize those employees and hand out those checks. It's a form of recognition for that length, just for that length of service, saying, you know, we value your loyalty.
Okay.
I guess 2 questions. Does your study reflect the fact that we're a very small town compared to most of the other towns, fewer people involved, and that we're in Brunswick County versus the other counties in the state? It reflects that?
And if you look at who we surveyed, we didn't survey anybody outside Brunswick and New Hanover. So we are comparing you to places that are smaller and larger, but in the local area. Totally. We have not gone beyond that.
Who's smaller?
Bald Head and, was that Chanel smaller? Hang on. Yeah, that Chanel.
By employees, or how you?
The population. is what I was
Population.
looking at. Y'all are, let's see, Bald Head has more employees, Chanel has more employees.
Malden
the
has twice as many.
population, I'm sorry?
Malden has about twice as many employees, and only 168 are permanent residents or something like that.
Yeah, they have paramedics on the island, because, you know, that's what their citizens say they want, as well as a fire department on the island. And that's where probably the bulk of the difference is. And of course, probably the biggest difference between y'all and National is they now have the fire department is paid as part of the town.
Right, they have a lot more employees because they go off the island.
Yeah, and again, I think the main difference is that fire department. What I try to do, especially in your supervisory jobs, is recognize, you know, that your supervisors may not be supervising quite as many people, but at your entry level, you compete head on with them on like police and utilities and those kinds of things. We also have provided a new employment application for you. I went online and looked at your application, and there's some things on there that do definitely need to be updated. So we're giving this to the town in a digital format that can be form-filled, that can be on the website. And then the last thing before the next tab is the personnel policy. Some of the language is very similar. Some of it is more modern and updated. A few new laws, I think there were some changes in family medical leave that had not been reflected yet. Just some a little bit more modern language in some cases. And then behind that last tab are the actual class specifications in alphabetical order. We do recommend that you leave these administrative. What you adopt is the title, but you want to leave the description itself administrative so that, you know, the town can say, you know, an employee can come in and say, well, that's not in my job description. You can pull it out and put it in there. Things, you know, little minor changes, they should be able to keep those up to date for those. If it's a major change that needs a title change, then it comes back to you. So any questions about that? On the whole, I have to tell you, in the last 2 years, probably half of our studies where organizations have gone as long as y'all have without doing this, their minimum implementation has been more than 10% payroll. We've had some at 18% payroll. So on the whole, y'all have done a pretty good job of staying up to date. So any other questions or comments? And as I said earlier, once you have time to go through it, y'all hear it, mark it up, identify questions, I will be happy to come up.
Anything, Ms. Hewitt, you got anything?
But Becky, could you outline for the board what you would propose the next steps in review, approval, implementation, to include maybe a guess as to what a timeline could be or that you would suggest?
You know, I would typically, boards need a couple of weeks to go through this and review it. Whenever y'all are ready, you know, if you want to go in and set a date, 2 or 3 weeks out, I'm happy to do that, to come back. If you want to go through it first, see if you have questions you want me to come back and answer, and then set a date, whichever process you think is better, I'm open to. Typically, once there are questions, if there are adjustments, unless, you know, I'm out of town a lot, we can usually make adjustments in about a week turnaround, get them back to you for adoption.
Would you propose that sort of dialogue be in a special meeting like this type of arena, or could that be accommodated like at our regular meeting?
It really depends on how many questions there are.
Okay.
You know, if you think it's gonna take more than 15 minutes or 20 minutes, y'all know what your agendas typically are. You know, I would probably get a feel for how many questions there are, how much dialogue you think is needed. I've done that, just depending on how many questions there are. It's actually, I have to say, it's kind of rare that there's more than 20 minutes worth of questions, but I won't say it's never happened, so I'm open to helping any way I can.
We can submit questions through David and for you to get it back.
You can, sometimes questions, you know, have a lot of nuance to them. And, you know, I can do email responses, written responses. Sometimes if I get several that are going to be 3 or 4 pages each, I'll suggest I come down and talk with them.
The clerk's suggesting that type of dialogue be in a public format, so if the board has questions for the benefit of the board, and that's the suggestion there. So I was just trying to, I mean, this study has been done at the bequest of the commissioners, so it's how would you like us to proceed, or our consultant to proceed?
If I mean, I agree it should be done in public. A lot of times when we get into the evening meeting, we just never know what's going to happen and how long things go. Would it be possible to have, I hate to do another special meeting, but could we do it the afternoon of the next BOCM, because we're all in town that day, if that would fit Becky's meeting or schedule, but it's a day we all pretty much know we're here.
It wouldn't be able to be, I have to look, P&Z is having a meeting that date, I believe is it at 2, Rhonda?
Yes.
They already scheduled a meeting,
Oh,
so
that's
it would
right,
just have to
the land
be.
use, the land use plan.
So,
meeting.
yes, I mean, it could be later, like 5, or I just wouldn't want to take away their public meeting that they've scheduled.
What is that day?
The 17th of September.
I can be here.
I mean, I would just propose it because we do all know it, and then it's just a question of, actually, the public meeting is before the P&Z meeting. They've moved the P&Z meeting, so it's going to be however long the P&Z meeting is, not how long the public open house is.
I know
And they didn't know how long, but could we do 5 o'clock?
I mean, that would give them 3 hours. I would hope that they could finish within.
But this would be just to get answers to questions, right?
Whichever the board prefers. I mean, and it's the board's room, so honestly, if you wanted to, you could take the meeting, but but we don't want to be mean.
Yeah.
Is it possible for 4 o'clock versus the 5?
Well, as long as P&Z knows so that they're done.
I'm sure Rhonda could pass it on.
Rhonda, you can move them along, right?
Is that what you think that would work for what you're doing?
I can tell them they need to be done by 4.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah. That sounds good, yeah. We've done that before.
I have it on my calendar, and I'll be happy to come back. Okay, thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity to work with you, and I'm looking forward to working with you tomorrow.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. September the 17th. All right, moving right along, number 4 on the agenda. Mr. Greer, Mr. Butler.
We had originally talked about, this is the attorney, hiring an attorney, originally talked about having them all come in, but Heather said that posed a problem, it would take too long to do that, so she kind of threw out that maybe we should talk about another method of selecting the attorney.
Or if that's how you wanted to
or if that's how we want to do it.
I just- how much time you,
Yeah.
more guidance from you guys as a group, because I think a couple of you have different opinions how you want it to
So,
be done.
so previously, we had two representatives from the board interview, and then they kind of narrowed down the field. We could do that, or we could split up this, there's 5, right, Heather?
Correct.
So we could split up that big group. I'm okay with either direction. Mike, you got it?
I guess it was my suggestion that we all be involved in each interview. And it's just that it's been my experience that sometimes we hear different things even though we're sitting in the same room at the same time. So your perception of what the attorney may say might be different than mine. So I'm willing to take the time and expend the time that it takes for all of us to do it individually. Do each firm individually.
Yeah, but I think then the problem presents itself that Heather was saying, that get all 5 of them here at the same time.
No.
And that's-
I think the idea would be you would bring them in at a specific time and they would be an hour apart or something, but we're gonna be here questioning them
For the day.
one-on-one. Yeah, it's gonna take a day, but, I mean, I think that was sort of the approach is, they don't all come in at the same time. They have an hour that they're gonna be
Well,
here.
it's public, so
Well,
they
it's-
could
no, it's
come and
pu-
watch.
No, you don't know. I would not, yeah, they could, but I would discourage it because I don't think it's actually good for later candidates to hear the
Well,
questions.
I'm just going,
So-
so we could do it, could we do it in a executive session?
No.
Noel said no.
So it is public. then.
It is public, but what I'm saying is, they're given an hour that they come, that we are gonna interview them. It's not that everybody come and sit out there and listen to each other.
But they can.
Well, they can.
Well, they can, but I would actually probably put them with a red mark at the very beginning because they're actually taking an advantage that the first person doesn't have. But, you know, if the first one comes in at 9, the second one is said be here at 10, 11, and then 1 and 2, we get the 5 done. And then we can do a discussion at the end and either make a decision or say, okay, now we all have each other's opinion, we can make a decision at the next, we can publicly discuss and make our formal decision at the next BOCM, which might be the way to do it publicly. But again, I think it's they're each given, we just give each one an hour block, not thinking it's gonna take an hour, but it might take 40 minutes if we have a lot, and we should have a lot of questions and very structured questions and ways of evaluating them against certain categories, just like you would do in business. So we actually should have some sort of a sheet that we are evaluating them on certain categories of experience, knowledge of towns like THB maybe, staffing level appropriate for the kind of work that we need, if it's rapid work, should we divvy up references? But again, I'm used to a qualifications sheet and a sort of a characteristics sheet that everybody then grades on, so that when you get to the discussion, you're all sort of talking apples to apples for the majority of the discussion. And then sort of personal little items, of course, get discussed too, but generally you try to have about 80%. You're looking for similar things, so it's similar categories. And I don't know that we have anything like that that's been used in the past. I don't know how you evaluated the lawyers last time.
John was one of the 2, right?
Yeah, we had a call, as we did this time, the town manager put together a call for candidates, they brought them in and we went down those requirements, and I think they've done that pretty good.
Uh,
The responses already to tell us, we're qualified, we've done this experience, we've done these things, we've got this many people, we're based here.
Correction on that, John. There wasn't an RFP put out, I don't think, for the last time.
But you went with a list of requirements.
No,
Well, they refer to the list that you sent them.
I'm not recalling that they sent out a list of requirements the last time that we went out.
Last time, I think we had 2 commissioners interview candidates, and then they had the town manager, and then we brought in the candidate that everybody had agreed on to interview her. So I don't, we didn't have a form. We didn't have a form or anything. Staff never saw a form of what we were asking each of the
Last time.
when we hired Noel.
This time we did put
We
out
did,
an
so this time
RFP.
we
It's
have-
fairly, yeah, we got one from the
Fairly
existing
detailed,
town
right?
attorney.
Yeah.
So we probably already have the requirements that,
So the RFP probably, I hope, has what you
right, hopefully.
mentioned. So that could be used during our, you know, during the interview. Are you good with that?
Probably just
I-
reviewing
I-
RFP,
I-
if we have any additional
Yeah,
comments.
the RFP is the minimum requirements.
Yeah.
It's sort of the minimum requirements that the town has for what should be, you know, if you pick the right person and everything, you know, fits, it should work. So there may be things that within this that, you know, we would have add-ons, or some are more important than the other, but this is a position description. It doesn't necessarily cover the things that are more intangible, which is a lot of what the interview is about. Fit with the town, you know, not personability, but ability to interact. Some of these, I'm not quite sure if we'll get the same person every time. You know, things like that are important. Again, I think that's what everybody would structure their questions around, that they're prepared to ask each candidate.
Are you proposing that we share each other's questions, or just come with your own questions?
I think everybody should just put together their own questions and then be flexible, that if Mike asks the exact same question that you had, just check it off as, I don't need to ask this as well. Or, you know, you may decide to rephrase it a little bit just to see if you get the same answer, but no, I'm not thinking that we should.
Okay, I would agree with that.
Because as long as we all are listening carefully and flexible, so that we don't ask the same question 3 or 4 times.
Okay. So how flexible, we may need to be a little flexible, you know, one day,
We might have
hour
to do
to hour,
2 days, yeah.
right? Yeah, split it up too, right, Heather? Isn't that what your fear is?
Honestly, I don't believe there's a day that everybody sitting up here is available for the next month, especially for a whole day. So it depends how quickly you guys want. I mean, if you want to move towards October so you could get everybody here at the same time, we could get your availability from October and we could go ahead and book it now. Or otherwise, I'm just giving you a warning, most likely somebody will not be sitting up here.
Well, Noel hasn't expressed any drop dead date of like, you know, I must be out of here by November 1st or something because I've got. Yeah, I know. I think everybody would like to be involved. So if September is just a tough month, October availabilities are.
Or can we assume we can split it into 2?
We could do 2 days also. I mean, that would work too. But there still would be.
You got to do it one whole day, Mike?
I'm just thinking logistically, if we're having a hard time getting all of us down here once, then we're doubling the chance of getting us all together.
Yeah, I think logistically, I don't know, Heather can decide, but I think a whole day logistically is the issue, not.
I don't think I have a day honestly that
2 hours.
with it. No, not with
Okay.
it, not with everybody. But if it works for October and we could do the whole days, because what you guys could do is, if you take 20 minutes for the first person, you could recess and come back into session at the time scheduled for the next person. So,
Okay.
I could schedule it an hour apart if you think
Okay.
that's sufficient for.
Okay, and then if we got that much time, I'm afraid of their schedules too, It's five attorneys to.
What,
Well, one attorney is going to be coming from Raleigh.
if we're going to do it in 2 days, then we don't need is there a day in September where you have a 2 or 3 hour block that we could do some of the firms and then do the other firms later on?
I honestly don't think so.
Okay, well, when you get all everybody's calendars, they just think, I'm open for 2 days if that's the way it's gotta work.
Okay.
And our schedule and their schedule, so, that's,
Okay.
Hopefully after.
Logistically, it's going to be a nightmare. Thank you, Heather.
Yeah.
okay. We didn't have a chance to have this discussion.
Yeah.
So everybody's agreed?
Usually, people who want to be hired are pretty flexible when it comes to coming to the,
Yeah.
for the resume,
Yeah.
for the interview. So it's really us,
Yeah.
our availability.
And I like the idea of everybody collectively being here so that we all hear the same thing and we can question,
Mhm.
Yeah. Okay, tell them 30 minutes, we're gonna interview and do a 1 hour slots, so we have a buffer there?
I have a question, if I may throw out. If there's a consensus that there's one or more of these candidates that the majority of you have no desire to hear, why don't we block an hour of time out with the majority of you already knowing that you don't want that person?
We haven't had a discussion like that at all.
Yeah.
But, there hasn't been any discussion at all amongst us, if there are any that are.
I'm not
I know,
I'm not accusing you
Oh,
of that. I'm
no,
just
no.
saying,
It's
It
just
seems
raising
to me
something we
like-
haven't discussed.
Fair question.
if I may speak, the chair would like to speak. I'm trying to say that if you have reviewed all of them, and in your minds, majority of you have no desire to hear one or more of those people, why would you want to block out the time? So I'm just simply saying, there may be a reason to consider to invite 2, 3, or 4, or maybe all 5. But before you just allocate a day and 5 hours of listening, do you want to hear all 5? Somewhere along the way, you ought to make that decision before you make the scheduled time, in my mind. If that makes no sense, I apologize.
I don't think it does make a lot of sense. The question is, how do you
that?
execute that? Do we feed Heather our own individual?
No, we have to do it in public. We have to do it in public. This is a public process. If there
Good
is
decision, yeah.
if there's something that we have a majority say, I don't think that it's worth us bringing them in for one reason or another. I think it has to be a public discussion and decision.
I like the idea, but I personally haven't disqualified any. I think they're all qualified according to the.
I withdraw my
But
recommendation.
no, good suggestion.
I don't see that it's a qualification. I frankly have reservations about employing a town attorney that is as far away as the RTP area. In terms of ready accessibility, and face it, there are times that Noel makes trips here that are called for on short notice, and she is readily available. And if the town manager needs her to do something with CAMA, if they have to be in rooms together, it works well. That 185 miles.
Which one is the?
It's the
Brew
Brow or Brew
Brow Law Firm.
Firm.
Yeah.
I don't say that they don't look qualified, but it's an RTP, and if any of you follow the traffic news, I go back and forth to RTP enough, but you do realize that you can have 40 closed for 6 hours at a time, that it's just closed because of an accident. So it's not a reliable thing. And again, I think that they are an awfully long way away if we have a sudden need and, half a day's notice. Which, again, Noel has been able to accommodate being close by.
Yeah, I had problems with the distance problem, and the other problem I had also was maybe it's just me, but I like one attorney.
Yeah.
Where they turn around and they say that 2 attorneys will be, and one of them will be a primary counsel. And, but I'd like a primary counsel to be here all the time.
I agree.
Yeah.
Um,
So I would rule this firm out.
Okay.
I had already done that.
So it sounds like.
Okay.
Is that just-
Can we move that, for reasons other than qualifications?
Right.
We will not interview the Brow law firm?
Yeah. Right.
I move,
Now we're down to 4.
okay? Okay,
And our normal policy would be to send a note back to them thanking them for, yeah, good, thank you.
Okay, we just eliminated one. Good idea, Mr. Mayor. I'm good. Everybody?
Any more discussion? Madam Clerk, what is your opinion of the position of the board at this point on this item?
I am going to try to schedule hour blocks in either 1 day or 2 days based on the board's availability. And I will send an email to you guys soliciting October since I just did September last time, just in case.
Are we through with this item? Is there a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
For a second?
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Adjourn, thank you.